This is part 4 of Unit 5, our last part, and again we're talking about U.S. expansion. The biggest expansion we're going to have since the Louisiana Purchase is going to be a main topic of our discussion here, and it involves the war with Mexico, or the Mexican-American War. Basically what the war is over is the border between Texas and Mexico. It's disputed. The Americans say it's the Rio Grande River, and the Mexicans say, no, that's too much territory, it's much further back, and that's what it's kind of over. Now, this is kind of interesting. It somewhat has some parallels to modern history, but a lot of people say Polk kind of orchestrated this war because he kind of provoked the Mexicans and kind of did some stuff along the border to try to antagonize them, kind of like poking a dog with a stick kind of thing. Just, you know, it's hard to blame the dog when he finally gets fed up and, you know, fights back. And that's kind of what happens, and that's talked about in your book kind of extensively. But just have some idea that really Polk kind of orchestrated or pulled some strings to make this turn into a war, because he was the president that was very concerned with expanding. Okay, Polk is the president at this time. He's the one that brings Texas eventually in to the country. He also wants to get more land over the Oregon territory with Britain. In fact, he threatens to go to war with Britain and so forth, who is still in Canada at this time and is claiming part of that territory for Canada. And so that's what we're kind of fighting out over there. So Polk is an expansionist president, and he kind of does a few things that are sort of shady because he wants to go at war with Mexico because he thinks they can win and they can grab even more land. So he's very concerned with expanding. Okay? And so he really is the kind of guy that stirs the pot or sets in motion. And when small fights break out between us and Mexico, he uses that as an excuse to go to a full-fledged war. And again, basically, it's primarily over disputes over the border. We think we should get more than Mexico wants to give us. And again, he kind of just provokes it, and eventually it goes to war. The war is very controversial in the United States. It's not a war that all Americans support, especially those that are opposed to slavery. And if you think about it, the reason why should be fairly obvious. If we get more territory, what's going to happen to slavery? And of course, it's going to expand. And so there's a political party that kind of emerges over this called the Free Soil Party, or the Free Soil Movement. Eventually these people are going to kind of be some of the Republican Party that's going to emerge closer to the Civil War. But again, they just don't want to see slavery expanded into the territories, and they know if we acquire more land, that's more than likely going to happen. But the war is very controversial. There are many people against it. Probably the most famous one is Henry David Thoreau, who writes an essay called Civil Disobedience. Civil disobedience is a term for breaking a law intentionally because you think that law is unjust. And in this case, Henry David Thoreau refused to pay taxes because he thought this war of Polk's was a phony war. It was not justified. It's just us trying to get more wealth and power and more land. And so he refused to pay his taxes, and he went to jail for that. Okay? Abe Lincoln is also another outspoken person against the war. And again, primarily his reason is because of the expansion of slavery in the territories. He doesn't want slavery to expand. Abe Lincoln is not a fan of slavery, and so he knows that slavery will only live longer and grow if we continue to absorb more land. And he also is not convinced that it's a justified war as well. But the main thing to know, again, is that Polk kind of starts this war kind of by egging on the Mexicans. He uses it as an excuse to grab more land, and most people, or I shouldn't say most, but many people are against it, but there are many people who are in favor of it as well. Initially, the war is going very well for us. We're doing well, but as we get closer to the heart of Mexico and Mexico City and so forth, the fighting, as you can imagine, gets more intense as the Mexicans fight on their homeland and closer to their capital. And as a result, the casualties get higher and higher of the Americans, and they get kind of frustrated, and they start to lash out and actually kill innocent women and children, and there's all kinds of stories of, you know, basically raping and pillaging Mexican cities as they go along, and that's due to the frustration as more and more American lives are lost. So the war is kind of an ugly thing on our history. Okay, we do end up winning, as the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo is the treaty that ends the war. The map that is on page 476 will show the vast amounts of land that we get as a result of this. Primarily, it's pretty much the southwest of the United States. Okay, you know, places like New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona, and so forth, but the map will show you quite clearly. So the war ends, we win, we get a bunch of territory, but it's kind of ugly. It's not really a justifiable war. We do some ugly things on it, and there's a lot of people at home that aren't very happy about it. But some things that are important to know about the war: newspapers, which are used to kind of to get people to support or be pro-war, become very important, because they are where people get their news, and they create a lot of instant heroes by what we call yellow journalism, which is kind of exaggerating stories or stretching the truth in order to make it sound more exciting so you can sell more newspapers. And that's going to be a theme that you'll see again. And as you can see here on the board, it's a lesson that people are going to repeat over and over and over. If you want to get people on your side about a particular thing, kind of give them sensationalized or exaggerated stories, and that tends to help you. The other thing about the war in Mexico, as I just remembered it right now, is a lot of American leaders become famous there, or learn their craft there, like General Grant and General Lee, who are going to be some of the commanders that are major players in the Civil War coming up, but other ones as well. That's where they kind of gain their fame, notoriety, learn their craft, become experienced people that they will use in the war coming up. Just wanted to mention that before we moved on. And then the last slide here just deals with the gold rush in California. Gold is discovered in Sutter's Mill, as you probably know, in 1848, and the reason they're called the 49ers just because it takes a while for word to get around, and it's really in 49 that most of the people start to come, and it's a huge, huge gold rush. People are coming from all over, and if you look on page 479, it shows you kind of who the 49ers were. 80% of them are from America, but the other 20% are kind of from all over. Now that's significant because this is the first time that a lot of Americans are going to see people from different parts of the world or different cultures. And even the Americans that are there are from all over. Some are from the north, south, west, you know, Texas, Maine, Iowa, Ohio, you know, Virginia, all over. And so the main point here is it's a very diverse group, and that's one of the reasons this part of the country is even really diverse to this day, is because of the 49ers and the gold rush. Most of the gold, unfortunately, isn't by the guys trying to strike it rich, the common guys. Most of the gold is actually by the large companies. Large companies come in and buy claims, and the reason that is because they have the resources to get to where most of the gold is, which is pretty far underground. Even though people are panning for gold, and they do find some success with that, and there are some examples of people getting rich, most of the time it's the big companies that actually make the profits off the gold. If you really wanted to get rich in the gold rush, it wasn't mining for gold, but selling stuff to miners. The equipment they needed, whether that be food or shovels or tents or lanterns or whatever it might be, providing things for the miners is where the money was at. Also in that is providing food, of course, beverage, and entertainment was also the lucrative thing. So prostitution was very high. Saloons were extremely common. A small town might have, you know, 4 or 5 saloons and not even one single church, or only one church. But that's really where the money was. And Levi Strauss, for example, creates denim jeans, very durable pants that these miners could wear. And that's where his fortune comes from, because he supplied it to the miners. Now the mining camps themselves, very rowdy places, as you can probably imagine, kind of similar to the Wild West, very violent. There's not a lot of police. It's, you know, you have to take care of yourself. There's vigilante justice, taking the law in your own hands. They're dirty, they're primitive, they're often boom and bust kind of places as well. So they're not around a whole lot. They're temporary. Once people don't find gold or they find gold somewhere else, people pack up and move. So these mining camps are diverse, but they're filled with a lot of negative things, mostly violence and rowdy behavior, so forth. This gold fever leads to huge increase in population of California. This is what brings people west, which is going to kind of be a theme in American history. People think moving west when times are tough or to make a new start is kind of a theme. We don't move east, we move west. That's where the frontier is. There's a guy that we'll learn about, Frederick Jackson Turner, that has a famous thesis called the Frontier Thesis, is that's what made America great, because we always had to conquer the next hill, go over the next hill, and so forth, moving west. But especially San Francisco, early on becomes, because that's a port city, becomes very important. It grows very dramatically, much like the cities that we studied out on the East Coast. But this is what brings people to California, which is one of the states that's going to be admitted soon. Even before the Civil War, students don't often realize that, but California is a state before the Civil War breaks out, and that becomes one of the growing centers of our country, which is, of course, on the West Coast, which is different. So that ends part 4. This again was just about more expansion. In this case, we're focusing primarily on the Mexican-American War, which is, besides the Louisiana Purchase, the single biggest acquisition of land that we've had as a country, getting us pretty much the whole southwest part of the country. Again, a controversial war. Lots of people thought it was unnecessary, unjust, that it was just us being greedy and selfish. But we did win. And that changed because not only did our country grow, but some of the people that are going to be important in the next chapter of our history, the Civil War, got experience and fame there. And then we talked about the gold rush, which moved people specifically to California. Although they didn't get rich, a lot of the companies did. And it kind of changed the landscape of our country, because now more and more people are moving west. And remember, California became kind of a diverse part of the most diverse part of the country because of that. And so that ends Unit 5.